The woman stumbling into Hillsboro, Texas on that scorching August afternoon in 1878 looked like death itself had kissed her cheek and let her walk away. Emma Jenkins clutched her torn shawl around shoulders that trembled despite the oppressive heat, her brown hair matted with dust and sweat, her green eyes darting nervously at every sound that carried across the dry plains. She had been walking for 3 days straight, her boots worn through at the heels, her lips cracked and bleeding from the relentless sun. Behind her lay a trail of fear and desperation, and somewhere in the distance, she knew he was still searching. The main street of Hillsboro stretched before her like a dusty promise of temporary refuge. False-fronted buildings lined both sides of the wide dirt road, their weathered wood testament to years of harsh Texas weather. A general store stood next to a saloon, and further down she could make out the sheriff's office, though the sight of it made her stomach clench with anxiety. She could not go to the law. They would ask questions she could not answer, would send telegrams that might reach the wrong ears, would leave a trail that Marcus Caldwell could follow straight to her door. Emma's vision blurred as she took another step forward. Her legs finally gave out beneath her, and she collapsed in the middle of the street, the hard, packed earth rising up to meet her face. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was the sound of boots running toward her and a man's voice calling out in alarm. When consciousness returned, Emma found herself lying on a soft bed in a room she did not recognize. Clean white curtains fluttered at the window, and the scent of lavender filled her nostrils. Panic surged through her chest as she struggled to sit up, her mind immediately jumping to the worst possibilities. Had Marcus found her? Was this some elaborate trap? "Easy now," a gentle voice said from beside the bed. "You are safe here." Emma turned her head sharply to find a woman of about 50 sitting in a rocking chair near the window. She had kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her calico dress was simple but clean, and she held a basin of water in her lap with a cloth draped over the edge. "Where am I?" Emma's voice came out as a hoarse whisper, her throat raw from days without proper water. "My name is Margaret Harris. This is my boarding house. My son found you collapsed in the street and brought you here. You have been unconscious for nearly 6 hours." The woman leaned forward, dipping the cloth in the water and wringing it out. "May I?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. Margaret gently pressed the cool cloth to her forehead, and the relief was immediate. As the woman tended to her, Emma studied her face, searching for any sign of malice or hidden agenda. She found none, only genuine concern. "What is your name, dear?" Margaret asked softly. "Emma," she replied, deliberately leaving off her surname. The less anyone knew, the safer she would be. "Well, Emma, you gave us quite a fright. My son Matthew carried you all the way here. You are lucky he saw you when he did. Another hour in that sun and you might not have made it." At the mention of her son, the door to the room opened and a tall figure filled the doorway. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she took in the sight of the man standing there. He was probably in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar. His blue eyes held an intensity that made her simultaneously want to shrink away and lean closer. He wore dusty trousers and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. A hat dangled from his hand, and there was genuine concern etched across his handsome features. "How is she?" he asked his mother, though his gaze remained fixed on Emma. "Awake, as you can see." "Emma, this is my son, Matthew Harris. Matthew, meet Emma." "Madam," Matthew said with a slight nod, his voice a rich baritone that seemed to rumble through the room. "I apologize if I startled you earlier. You looked like you needed help in a hurry." "Thank you," Emma managed, her voice still weak. "I do not remember much after I fell. You were in bad shape, When is the last time you ate something? Matthew stepped further into the room, concern evident in the furrow of his brow. Emma tried to remember. She had finished the last of her meager supplies 2 days ago, a handful of dried meat and stale bread she had purchased in the last town. Before that, it had been sporadic at best. I am not certain. A few days, perhaps. Margaret made a disapproving sound with her tongue. Matthew, go fetch some broth from the kitchen, and some bread, but make sure it is soft. Her stomach will need to adjust slowly. Matthew nodded and left immediately. Emma watched him go, noting the confident way he moved, the breadth of his shoulders, the fact that he wore no gun belt. Something about that last detail made her relax marginally. In her experience, men who wore guns were men to be feared. He is a good boy, Margaret said, following Emma's gaze. Works hard on the ranch just outside of town. We keep this boarding house for extra income, and because I like having people around. Gets lonely otherwise, just the two of us. His father? Emma asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. She had no right to pry into their lives when she was keeping so many secrets of her own. Margaret's expression softened with old grief. Past 5 years ago, fever took him quick. Matthew stepped up, took over running the ranch, never complained once. He is all I have left in this world, and I am grateful every day for him. The love in the woman's voice made Emma's chest ache. She could not remember the last time someone had spoken about her with such affection. Her own mother had died when she was young, and her father had been a hard man, more interested in finding his next bottle than raising his daughter. When Marcus Caldwell had come into her life 2 years ago, she had thought he was her salvation. How wrong she had been. Matthew returned with a tray balanced in his large hands. The smell of beef broth made Emma's stomach clench with hunger so intense it was almost painful. He set the tray on the bedside table and stepped back, as if aware that his presence might overwhelm her. "Take your time," he said. "There is plenty more where that came from." Margaret helped Emma sit up against the pillows, then positioned the tray across her lap. The first sip of broth was like heaven, warm and savory, and exactly what her battered body needed. She forced herself to eat slowly despite wanting to gulp it all down at once. "Where are you from, Emma?" Margaret asked conversationally as she settled back into her rocking chair. The question Emma had been dreading. She had prepared an answer during her long walk, a story that was close enough to the truth to be believable but vague enough to protect her. "East of here. My family is all gone now. I am looking for a fresh start, somewhere quiet to settle down." It was not entirely a lie. Her father had drunk himself to death 3 years ago, leaving her alone in the world. That vulnerability had made her an easy target for Marcus, who had swept into her life with promises of protection and love. She had believed him, had married him in a small ceremony with no witnesses, had moved into his grand house on the outskirts of Dallas thinking she had finally found safety. The first time he hit her, he had apologized profusely, blamed the stress of his business dealings, swore it would never happen again. But it had. Again and again, each time worse than the last, until Emma realized with horrifying clarity that if she stayed, Marcus Caldwell would eventually kill her. "Well, you have come to the right place," Margaret said warmly. "Hillsboro is a good town, full of decent folks. We look out for each other here." "Are you running from something?" Matthew's quiet question cut through the pleasant small talk like a knife. His blue eyes were fixed on her face, reading something in her expression that she had tried so hard to hide. "Matthew," Margaret admonished, "that is hardly appropriate to ask." "It is all right," Emma said, though her hands trembled around the bowl of broth. She met Matthew's gaze directly, saw the intelligence there, the concern, and made a decision. not to tell them everything, but to acknowledge at least a portion of the truth. I left a bad situation. I would prefer not to be found. Beyond that, I hope you will not press me for details. Something shifted in Matthew's expression. His jaw tightened and his hands curled into fists at his sides. Did someone hurt you? The gentle rage in his voice surprised her. He did not even know her, yet he seemed genuinely angry on her behalf. Emma looked down at her broth, unable to hold his penetrating gaze any longer. Yes. Emma, dear, you are safe here, Margaret said firmly. No one will hurt you under this roof. You have my word on that. You can stay as long as you need, Matthew added. The room is yours. We will not charge you rent until you are back on your feet and able to work, if that is what you want. The kindness was almost too much to bear. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since fleeing Dallas nearly 2 weeks ago. I cannot accept charity. I will work for my keep. I am a hard worker, I promise you that. We will figure something out, Margaret assured her. For now, you need to rest and recover your strength. We can discuss the details later. Over the following days, Emma slowly regained her strength under Margaret's careful tending. The older woman brought her meals 3 times a day, helped her bathe and wash her hair, even provided her with clean clothes that had belonged to Matthew's late aunt. Emma discovered that the boarding house currently had 3 other residents. An elderly man named Walter who worked at the general store, a young couple named Sarah and Tom who were saving money to buy their own homestead, and a traveling salesman named Mr. Peterson who was rarely around. Emma kept mostly to her room those first few days, still too weak and too frightened to venture far. But she could not help noticing Matthew. He seemed to find reasons to check on her throughout the day, bringing her fresh water, asking if she needed anything, sometimes just standing in the doorway as if to reassure himself that she was still there and still safe. On the 4th day, Emma felt strong enough to leave her room. She made her way downstairs in the early morning, hoping to help Margaret with breakfast preparations as a small way of beginning to repay the woman's kindness. She found the kitchen empty except for Matthew, who stood at the stove frying bacon with surprising competence. "Oh," Emma said, startled. "I thought your mother would be here." Matthew looked up and something warm flickered in his eyes when he saw her. "She went to the general store to pick up some supplies. Should be back soon. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you. I wanted to help with breakfast." Emma moved further into the kitchen, feeling suddenly self-conscious in the borrowed dress. It was a simple blue cotton thing, probably 10 years out of fashion, but it was clean and whole and infinitely better than the torn and dusty garments she had arrived in. "You know how to cook?" Matthew asked, gesturing toward the stove with the fork he was using to turn the bacon. "Yes. My mother taught me before she passed. I kept house for my father for years after that." Emma moved to stand beside him, assessing what needed to be done. There were eggs waiting to be cracked, bread that needed slicing, coffee that needed brewing. She set to work without waiting for permission, falling into the familiar rhythm of kitchen work. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes, the only sounds the sizzle of bacon and the clink of dishes. Emma found herself acutely aware of Matthew's presence beside her, the way he moved with quiet efficiency, the warmth radiating from his body in the confines of the small kitchen. She had been so afraid of men for so long that this feeling of safety in his presence was almost disorienting. "Emma," Matthew said finally, his voice low, "I want you to know that you do not have to tell me anything you do not want to. Your past is your business. But if someone comes looking for you, I need to know what we might be dealing with." Emma's hand stilled in the act of cracking an egg. She had been dreading this conversation, knowing it was inevitable but hoping to put it off a while longer. "What makes you think someone will come looking?" The way you startled when Mr. Peterson came home last night. I heard it from my room. The way you watch the street from your window. The fact that you flinch every time you hear boots on the porch." Matthew's voice was gentle but firm. "I have seen fear before, Emma. You are terrified." "Of what, I do not know. But if danger is coming to this town, to my mother's house, I need to be prepared." He had every right to ask. Emma knew that. She owed these people honesty, or at least as much of it as she could safely give. She took a deep breath and forced herself to continue cracking eggs into the bowl, needing the familiar task to ground her as she spoke. "I was married," she said quietly. "My husband was not a kind man. He had a temper, and when things did not go his way, he took it out on me. I stayed longer than I should have, kept hoping he would change, but it only got worse. One night, he beat me so badly I could not stand for 2 days. When I finally could move again, I knew I had to leave or I would die there." Matthew's jaw clenched, and she saw his knuckles go white around the handle of the fork. "Where is he now?" "Dallas, as far as I know. But he has money and connections. If he wants to find me badly enough, he will." Emma met Matthew's eyes, needing him to understand the full weight of what she was saying. "I will leave if you want me to. I will not put your mother in danger or anyone else in this house, but I have nowhere else to go." "You are not leaving." Matthew's voice was hard as iron. "This is Texas. A man does not get to beat a woman and then chase her across the state like she is his property. You are staying right here where we can keep you safe. You do not even know me." "I know enough." Matthew set down the fork and turned to face her fully. "I know you have been hurt badly enough to run with nothing but the clothes on your back. I know you walked for days through dangerous country rather than stay in a place where you were not safe. I know you have more courage than half the men in this town. That is enough for me." Emma felt something crack open in her chest, some hard shell she had built around her heart to protect herself. This man, this stranger, was offering her protection without asking for anything in return. It was so foreign to her experience that she almost did not know how to accept it. "Thank you," she whispered, and was horrified to feel tears sliding down her cheeks. Matthew reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently brushed the tears from her face with his thumb. His touch was impossibly gentle, as if she were made of spun glass and might shatter at any moment. "You are safe here, Emma. I give you my word. No one is going to hurt you again." The sound of the front door opening made them both step apart quickly. Margaret bustled into the kitchen with a basket over her arm, talking cheerfully about the gossip she had heard at the general store. If she noticed the charged atmosphere between them, she was kind enough not to comment. As the days turned into weeks, Emma settled into life at the boarding house. She took over most of the cooking and cleaning, insisting on earning her keep despite Margaret's protests. The work was hard but satisfying, and it kept her mind occupied. The other residents were kind to her, especially Sarah, who was close to Emma's own age of 23 and seemed eager for female friendship. But it was Matthew who occupied most of her thoughts. He left early each morning to work at his ranch, returning in the evenings dusty and tired, but always with a smile for his mother and an increasingly warm look for Emma. He began finding excuses to linger in the kitchen after dinner, helping her wash dishes or simply sitting at the table while she prepared the next day's bread. They talked during those evening hours, tentative at first, then with growing ease. Matthew told her about the ranch, about the challenges of keeping cattle alive through the harsh Texas summers, about his dreams of expanding his herd and maybe hiring a few ranch hands so he would not have to work every hour of daylight. Emma found herself opening up in return, telling him about her childhood, the happy memories before her mother's death, the books she had loved to read when she could get her hands on them. She was careful never to mention Marcus by name, never to give too many details about her life in Dallas. But Matthew seemed to sense the boundaries and never pushed. He just listened, his blue eyes intent on her face, sometimes reaching across the table to briefly squeeze her hand when she mentioned something particularly painful. Emma found herself falling for him slowly, like sinking into warm water. It terrified her. She had sworn after escaping Marcus that she would never trust another man, never put herself in a position to be hurt again. But Matthew was nothing like her husband. Where Marcus had been controlling and volatile, Matthew was steady and patient. Where Marcus had demanded her submission, Matthew treated her as an equal. Where Marcus had used his fists to get his way, Matthew had never raised his voice to her even once. One evening in late September, nearly 6 weeks after her arrival in Hillsboro, Emma was alone in the kitchen kneading dough when Matthew came in from the ranch earlier than usual. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and there was a nasty scrape down his left arm. What happened? Emma rushed to him immediately, her hands hovering over the injury without quite touching it. "Just a disagreement with a fence post," Matthew said with a rueful smile. "The fence post won. Sit down. Let me clean that." Emma was already reaching for the clean cloths and the bottle of whiskey Margaret kept for medicinal purposes. Matthew obediently sat at the kitchen table and rolled up his sleeve to expose the full extent of the scrape. It was not deep, but it was dirty, and Emma knew from experience that such wounds could fester if not properly tended. She dampened a cloth and began gently cleaning away the dirt and blood. "This might sting," she warned before applying the whiskey. Matthew hissed slightly but did not pull away. "You have done this before." It was not a question. Emma kept her eyes on her work, trying not to think about all the times she had tended her own injuries in secret, hiding the evidence of Marcus's temper. "Yes. Did you ever fight back?" Again, that quiet question that cut straight to the heart of things. Emma's hand stilled. "Once. It only made things worse. I learned it was better to just endure it and wait for it to be over." Matthew's hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his arm. "Emma, look at me." She raised her eyes reluctantly to meet his. "You never have to endure anything like that again. You understand?" "Never." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her heart skip a beat. "Matthew, you barely know me. Why do you care so much?" He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because from the moment I saw you lying in that street, looking so broken and so brave all at once, something in me just knew. I cannot explain it any better than that. I look at you and I see someone worth protecting, someone worth knowing. And every day I get to know you better, every conversation we have, every smile you give me, it just confirms what I felt from the start." "What did you feel?" Emma whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "That you were going to change my life." Matthew turned his hand over so their fingers could intertwine. "That if I was smart enough and patient enough, you might let me be part of yours." Emma's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I am afraid." "I know. I am not asking you to stop being afraid. I am just asking you to maybe consider the possibility that not all men are like the one you left behind. That maybe, if you wanted to, you could trust me. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday." She studied his face, this kind man who had shown her nothing but gentleness and respect. The man who worked himself to exhaustion every day but still made time to talk with her each evening. The man who made his mother laugh and treated the boarding house residents with courtesy. The man whose eyes lit up every time she entered a room. "I already trust you," Emma admitted. "That is what scares me." Matthew's face split into a slow smile that made her stomach flutter. "Then maybe you are braver than you think." He lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. It was the most chaste of gestures, but it sent warmth flooding through Emma's entire body. She had forgotten that a man's touch could be tender rather than painful, that it could make her feel cherished rather than afraid. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening, and Margaret calling out that she was home. They sprang apart like guilty children, though Margaret's knowing smile when she entered the kitchen suggested she was not fooled in the slightest. As October arrived, and the brutal Texas heat finally began to ease, Emma found herself truly happy for the first time in years. She had fallen into an easy rhythm with the boarding house routine, had made friends with Sarah and a few of the other women in town, had even started attending church services on Sunday mornings. Matthew had introduced her to people as his friend Emma, and no one asked uncomfortable questions about where she had come from or why she was alone. The relationship between Emma and Matthew deepened with each passing day. They had not kissed, had barely touched beyond those brief hand-holds in the kitchen, but the connection between them was undeniable. Emma caught herself watching for him through the window in the afternoons, her heart lifting when she spotted his tall form riding down the main street. Matthew had taken to bringing her small gifts, wildflowers he had picked on the range, a length of pretty blue ribbon from the general store, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. It was the poetry book that finally broke down the last of Emma's walls. She had been sitting on the porch swing one evening, reading by the light of the setting sun when Matthew joined her. Without a word, he sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "Read to me," he asked softly. Emma obliged, her voice growing stronger as she read verses about love and longing, about hope and new beginnings. When she finished the poem and looked up, she found Matthew watching her with such open adoration that it stole her breath. "Emma," he said, his voice rough, "I know it has not been that long since you came here. I know you are still healing from what you went through, but I need you to know that I have fallen in love with you, completely, irrevocably in love with you. I am not asking you to say it back. I just need you to know how I feel." Emma set the book aside with trembling hands. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotion, joy, terror, hope, fear, all tangled together. She thought of Marcus, of the hell he had put her through, of the scars both visible and invisible that she still carried. But she also thought of Matthew, of his kindness and patience, of the way he made her feel safe and valued and seen. "I am still legally married," she whispered. "I do not know how to fix that, and I am terrified that he will find me." "We will figure it out," Matthew promised. "Together. Whatever comes, we will face it together. He is a dangerous man, Matthew. You do not understand what he is capable of. Then tell me, help me understand." So Emma did. For the first time since arriving in Hillsboro, she told the whole story. She told him about Marcus Caldwell, about his wealth and his connections, about the way he had charmed her at first, and then slowly revealed his true nature. She described the beatings, the isolation, the way he had controlled every aspect of her life. She told him about the night she had finally escaped, stealing away while Marcus was passed out drunk, taking nothing but a small bag of food and the clothes on her back. Matthew listened to all of it, his face growing harder with each revelation. When she finally fell silent, drained from the telling, he pulled her gently into his arms. Emma stiffened at first, old instincts screaming at her to pull away, but then she forced herself to relax, to accept the comfort he was offering. "I am going to keep you safe," Matthew murmured into her hair. "I swear on my life, Emma, he is never going to touch you again." Emma allowed herself to believe him. She wrapped her arms around his waist and held on tight, feeling something inside her finally begin to heal. The next few weeks were perhaps the happiest of Emma's life. She and Matthew were inseparable when he was not working, taking walks together through town, sitting together at church, spending long evenings talking on the porch. He courted her with old-fashioned gentleness, always asking permission before taking her hand, respecting her need to take things slowly. Their first kiss happened on a cool November evening. They had been sitting on the porch swing, bundled in jackets against the chill, when Matthew had tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand had lingered on her cheek, his thumb brushing across her lower lip, and Emma had made the decision to lean in and close the distance between them. The kiss was soft and sweet, nothing like the demanding, bruising kisses Marcus had forced on her. Matthew kissed her like she was precious, like he had all the time in the world, like her pleasure mattered more than his own. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Emma felt tears on her cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" Matthew asked immediately, concern flooding his features. "No," Emma assured him, laughing wetly. "No, I am just happy. I did not know I could feel this way." Matthew kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "Get used to it, because I plan to make you this happy every single day for the rest of our lives." "Matthew Harris, are you proposing to me?" "Not yet. But I will, Emma Jenkins. Just as soon as we figure out how to free you from that monster legally. I want to do this right. I want to marry you properly, with the whole town as witnesses, and build a life with you that has no shadows hanging over it." Emma believed him. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope for a real future, one filled with love and safety and possibility. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It was a cold December morning when Marcus Caldwell rode into Hillsboro. Emma was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard the unfamiliar horse outside. Something made her glance out the window, and her blood turned to ice when she saw him dismounting in front of the boarding house. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall and handsome in an almost cruel way, with dark hair slicked back and cold gray eyes. He wore an expensive suit despite the dust of the road, and a gun sat prominently on his hip. Everything about him screamed wealth and power and danger. "No," Emma breathed, backing away from the window. "No, no, no." Margaret looked up from the table where she was setting out plates. "Emma, what is wrong?" Before Emma could answer, there was a harsh knock at the front door. Margaret moved to answer it, but Emma grabbed her arm. "Do not. Please." "That is my husband." Margaret's eyes widened in understanding. "Go upstairs to your room and lock the door. I will handle this. He will not give up. He will tear this house apart looking for me. Then it is a good thing Matthew is still here." Margaret's face was set in determined lines. "Go. Now." Emma fled up the back stairs just as another thunderous knock sounded at the door. She made it to her room and locked the door with shaking hands, then pressed her ear against the wood to try to hear what was happening below. She heard Margaret open the front door, heard Marcus's smooth, cultured voice introducing himself. "Good morning, madam. I am Marcus Caldwell from Dallas. I am looking for my wife, Emma. I have reason to believe she may have passed through this town. Perhaps you have seen her. About this tall, brown hair, green eyes, pretty in a common sort of way." The casual cruelty in that last description made Emma's stomach turn. "I am afraid I have not seen anyone matching that description," Margaret said, her voice cool and polite. "Perhaps you should try the sheriff's office. They might be able to help you." "Oh, I do not think that will be necessary. You see, I have been tracking Emma for months now. I know she came through here. In fact, I have it on good authority that she has been staying in this very boarding house." Emma's heart sank. Someone had betrayed her. She thought frantically through everyone she had met in town, trying to figure out who might have recognized her and sent word to Dallas. "I am sorry, but you are mistaken," Margaret said firmly. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have breakfast to prepare. I am not leaving without my wife." Marcus's voice had taken on a hard edge that Emma knew all too well. It was the tone that preceded violence. She is my property, bought and paid for with a marriage license. I have every legal right to take her back to Dallas. No man has a right to harm a woman, legal or otherwise. That was Matthew's voice, hard as steel. Emma's heart leaped. He must have heard the commotion and come in from the barn. "And who might you be?" Marcus asked, disdain dripping from every word. "Matthew Harris. This is my mother's boarding house, and I am telling you that you need to leave. Now." "Not without Emma. The lady said she has not seen anyone by that name, so you can either leave of your own accord or I can help you along." Emma heard the sound of footsteps, then a crash that made her jump. She could not stand it any longer. Whatever was happening down there, she could not hide in her room like a coward while Matthew and Margaret faced Marcus alone. She unlocked her door and rushed downstairs. The scene in the front hall froze her in her tracks. Matthew and Marcus were facing off like two bulls about to charge, with Margaret hovering anxiously to the side. Marcus's face was red with rage, while Matthew looked like he was carved from stone. "Emma." Marcus's face transformed when he saw her, a smile spreading across his features that did not reach his eyes. "There you are, darling. I have been so worried. Come here." It was not a request. Emma's body remembered that tone, remembered the consequences of disobedience. She actually took a step forward before catching herself. "No," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I am not going with you, Marcus. I want a divorce." Marcus's expression darkened. "Do not be ridiculous. You are my wife. You belong to me. Now stop this foolishness and get your things." "We are leaving." She said no. Matthew moved to stand between Emma and Marcus, his body a wall of protection. "I suggest you respect her wishes. And I suggest you stay out of matters that do not concern you, Cowboy." Marcus's hand moved toward his gun. Everything happened very fast after that. Matthew was faster, his hand shooting out to grab Marcus's wrist before he could draw his weapon. The two men struggled, crashing into the wall hard enough to rattle the pictures hanging there. Margaret screamed. Emma stood frozen, watching in horror as the two men fought. Matthew was strong from years of hard ranch work, but Marcus fought dirty, going for eyes and throat with no regard for honor or fairness. They crashed through the parlor door, upending furniture and sending one of Margaret's vases crashing to the floor. "Stop it," Emma shouted. "Please stop." But they were beyond hearing her. Marcus managed to land a solid punch to Matthew's jaw that sent him staggering back. He followed it up with a kick that caught Matthew in the ribs. Emma saw red. Without thinking, she grabbed the heavy iron skillet from the kitchen and brought it down on the back of Marcus's head with all her strength. Marcus dropped like a stone, out cold before he hit the floor. Matthew straightened up slowly, one hand pressed to his ribs, staring at Emma in shock. The skillet fell from her nerveless fingers with a clang. "Is he dead?" Emma whispered. Matthew knelt beside Marcus and checked for a pulse. "No, just unconscious, though he is going to have one hell of a headache when he wakes up." He looked up at Emma, and despite everything, there was pride in his eyes. "That was quite a swing." "We need to get the sheriff," Margaret said, already heading for the door, "before he wakes up." The sheriff arrived within minutes, a grizzled man in his 50s named Tom Bancroft, who had been keeping the peace in Hillsboro for over a decade. He listened to their story with a grim expression, occasionally glancing down at Marcus's unconscious form. "This is a complicated situation," Sheriff Bancroft said once they had finished. "Technically, he is her legal husband. He has a right to demand she return with him. Even if he beats her," Matthew demanded. "Even if her life is in danger. I am not saying it is right, son. I am just saying what the law is. Unless she can prove abuse in a court, the law says a wife has to obey her husband." Then the law is wrong, Emma said quietly. All three of them looked at her in surprise. She met the sheriff's eyes steadily, finding a core of strength she had not known she possessed. I will not go back with him. I would rather go to jail myself than return to that house. He will kill me eventually, Sheriff. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but someday. And I am done waiting for that day to come. Sheriff Bancroft studied her for a long moment, then sighed. I believe you, madam, and for what it is worth, I think you are right to leave him, but my hands are tied. Unless he commits a crime here in Hillsboro, there is not much I can do. He drew a gun on me in front of witnesses, Matthew pointed out. That is assault, is it not? Did he actually draw the weapon? He tried to. I stopped him before he could. The sheriff rubbed his face tiredly. That is a gray area at best. Look, here is what I can do. I will arrest him for disturbing the peace and keep him locked up overnight. That will give you folks some time to figure out your next move. But come morning, I will have to let him go. And when I do, there is nothing stopping him from coming right back here. It was better than nothing, but not by much. They watched as the sheriff hauled Marcus's still unconscious form out to his horse and rode off toward the jail. Once they were gone, Emma sank down onto the stairs and put her head in her hands. What am I going to do? She whispered. Matthew sat down beside her, gently pulling her against his side despite his bruised ribs. We are going to figure this out. There has to be a way. There is not. The law is on his side. I am his property as far as the courts are concerned. The hopelessness in Emma's voice broke Matthew's heart. Then we change your name and move, Margaret suggested from where she was righting the overturned furniture. Go somewhere he cannot find you, maybe California or up north to Colorado. He will just keep looking, Emma said. He is obsessive. I am his possession, and he does not like it when people take what is his. He will spend every penny he has to track me down. They sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Matthew who finally spoke. What if you were not his wife anymore? Emma looked up at him. I do not understand. What if there was a way to prove the marriage was not legal in the first place? Then he would have no claim on you at all. But we were married. I was there. There was a ceremony and everything. You said there were no witnesses, right? Just you, him, and some justice of the peace he knew. Matthew's mind was racing now, putting pieces together. What if that man was not really a justice of the peace? What if the whole thing was a sham, just Marcus's way of making you think you were tied to him? Emma felt hope flicker in her chest for the first time since seeing Marcus outside the window. How would we prove that? We would need to go to Dallas and check the records. If there is no record of your marriage, then legally it never happened. You would be free. Matthew turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. It is risky. We would be going right into his territory, but it might be our only chance. He will be watching for me there. I will never make it into Dallas alive. Not if we are smart about it, and not if you have protection. Matthew's expression was determined. I am not letting you face this alone, Emma. Whatever it takes, we will see this through together. Margaret nodded firmly. And I am coming too. A young lady traveling with family looks far less suspicious than one traveling with just a young man. We will say we are visiting relatives for the holidays. This is too dangerous, Emma protested. I cannot ask you to risk yourselves for me. You are not asking, we are offering. Matthew squeezed her hands gently. Emma, you are not alone anymore. You have people who care about you, who want to help. Let us. Emma looked between Matthew and Margaret, seeing nothing but love and determination in their faces. These people had taken her in when she had nothing, had given her safety and friendship and hope. And now they were willing to risk everything to help her find freedom. All right, she said softly. All right, let us go to Dallas. They spent the rest of the day planning. Matthew made arrangements with his ranch hand to look after things while they were gone. Margaret packed bags and spread word around town that they would be away for the holidays visiting family in Dallas. They decided to leave the very next morning, before Marcus was released from jail, to give themselves as much of a head start as possible. That night, Emma could not sleep. She stood at her window looking out at the quiet street, trying to calm the fear that churned in her stomach. Tomorrow they would set out for Dallas, toward danger rather than away from it, and she had no idea if they would succeed or if she was just leading Matthew and Margaret to their deaths. A soft knock at her door made her turn. "Come in." Matthew entered, still fully dressed. "I saw your light, could not sleep either, too many thoughts racing through my head." Emma turned back to the window. "Matthew, are you certain about this? There is still time to change our minds, to just run instead." Matthew came to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him but not quite touching. "I am certain. Emma, I meant what I said before. I love you. And I am not going to stand by and watch you spend the rest of your life running and hiding. You deserve better than that." Emma turned to face him, looking up into his handsome face. Even bruised from the fight with Marcus, he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been too afraid to say it, but I do. I love you so much it terrifies me." Matthew's face broke into a brilliant smile. He cupped her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "May I kiss you?" In answer, Emma rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was different from their first one, deeper and more urgent, filled with all the emotion they could not put into words. Matthew's arms came around her, holding her close, and Emma melted into his embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "When this is all over, when you are free, I am going to marry you properly, with a real ceremony and a real justice of the peace and the whole town as witnesses. I am going to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy. That is a promise." "I will hold you to that," Emma said, smiling through her tears. They left for Dallas at first light, traveling by train to make better time. The journey took 2 days, and Emma spent most of it trying not to jump at every shadow. She kept expecting to see Marcus around every corner, kept waiting for the moment when everything would fall apart. But Matthew and Margaret were steady presences on either side of her, keeping her grounded. Matthew kept her hand clasped in his for most of the journey, his thumb tracing soothing circles on her skin. Margaret chatted cheerfully with other passengers, maintaining their cover story about visiting family. They arrived in Dallas on a gray December afternoon. The city was much larger than Hillsboro, full of noise and crowds and endless motion. Emma pulled her shawl up over her head, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. "Where is the courthouse?" Matthew asked a passing gentleman. 3 blocks east, big brick building." "You cannot miss it." They made their way through the crowded streets, Emma's heart pounding with every step. This was Marcus's city, his territory. He had friends and business associates everywhere. If anyone recognized her and word got back to him that she had returned, their whole plan would be ruined. The courthouse was indeed impossible to miss, a grand 3-story building that spoke of authority and permanence. They climbed the steps and entered through the heavy oak doors. The interior was all marble and dark wood, echoing with the sounds of footsteps and hushed conversations. "Can I help you folks?" A clerk looked up from his desk, peering at them over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Yes, sir," Matthew said politely. "We are trying to verify a marriage record." The wedding would have taken place about 2 years ago in October of 1876. "Names?" Marcus Caldwell and Emma Jenkins. The clerk opened a large ledger and began paging through it, running his finger down columns of names. Emma held her breath, hardly daring to hope. The clerk reached the relevant section and frowned, going back to check again. "I am not finding any record of a marriage between those two individuals," he said finally. "Are you certain of the date?" "It was October 15th, 1876, Emma said, her voice shaking slightly. "A Thursday. Late afternoon." The clerk checked again, shaking his head. "No record. And I assure you, madam, if a legal marriage had taken place in this county, it would be recorded here. This ledger is maintained very carefully." Matthew and Emma exchanged glances, hope and disbelief warring on both their faces. "Is there any other place it might be recorded?" Matthew asked. "Not in Dallas County, no. If you were married here, it would be in this book." The clerk looked at Emma with a touch of sympathy. "I am sorry, madam. It appears you were deceived." They walked out of the courthouse in a daze. Emma felt like she was floating, like none of this could possibly be real. "I am not married," she whispered. "All this time I was never really married to him." "You are free," Matthew said, wonder in his voice. He grabbed her by the waist and spun her around, laughing. "Emma, you are free." Margaret was beaming, tears streaming down her face. "We need to get documentation. Something official that proves the marriage does not exist. That way, if he tries to claim you again, you have proof." They went back inside and requested a certified letter stating that no marriage record existed between Marcus Caldwell and Emma Jenkins. The clerk prepared it for a small fee, impressing the courthouse seal into the wax. Emma folded the precious document and tucked it carefully into her bag. "We should leave Dallas as quickly as possible," Emma said, her joy tempered by caution. "The longer we stay, the more likely it is that someone will recognize me and alert Marcus." They made their way back to the train station, walking quickly through the darkening streets. They were only a block away when Emma heard a voice that froze her blood. "Emma! Emma, wait!" She turned to see Marcus running toward them, his face contorted with rage. He must have been released from jail and come straight to Dallas, somehow guessing where they would go. His hand was on his gun, and Emma knew with terrible certainty that he was past caring about witnesses or consequences. "Run!" Matthew shouted, pushing Emma toward Margaret, but there was nowhere to run. They were in the middle of a crowded street with Marcus rapidly closing the distance between them. Emma saw him draw his gun, saw him take aim, and time seemed to slow down. "You think you can leave me?" Marcus screamed. "You are mine. If I cannot have you, no one will." The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the confines of the street. Emma screamed, but the bullet did not strike her. Matthew had thrown himself in front of her, taking the shot meant for her heart. He collapsed to the ground, blood blooming across his shoulder. Emma dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands frantically against the wound. "No, no, no. Matthew, stay with me." "I love you," Matthew gasped out, his face white with pain. Marcus was advancing again, raising the gun for another shot. But before he could fire, a group of men from the street tackled him to the ground. Someone must have already gone for the authorities because within minutes police officers were on the scene, hauling Marcus away in handcuffs as he screamed threats and obscenities. "Someone get a doctor." Margaret was shouting. "My son has been shot." A crowd had gathered and several people ran off to find medical help. Emma kept pressure on Matthew's wound, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to be all right. You have to be all right. I love you too much to lose you now." "Not planning on going anywhere," Matthew said through gritted teeth. "Takes more than a bullet to kill a Harris." The doctor arrived and took charge, directing them to carry Matthew to his nearby office. The next few hours were a blur of blood and fear and desperate prayer. The doctor worked on Matthew while Emma and Margaret paced the waiting room, holding onto each other for support. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, the doctor emerged. "He is going to be fine." The bullet went clean through without hitting anything vital. He lost some blood and he will need rest, but he should make a full recovery. Emma nearly collapsed with relief. Margaret caught her, both women crying and laughing at the same time. "Can we see him?" he is asking for Emma. Emma rushed into the room where Matthew lay propped up on a bed, his shoulder bandaged and his arm in a sling. His color was better, though he still looked exhausted. When he saw her, his face lit up. "There is my brave girl," he said softly. Emma went to him carefully, mindful of his injury, and took his good hand in both of hers. "You could have died. Worth it to keep you safe." Matthew squeezed her hand. "Besides, you said you loved me. I heard it clear as day. That alone was worth taking a bullet for." "Idiot," Emma said fondly, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "My wonderful, brave, idiotic man. Speaking of which—" Matthew looked past her to where his mother stood in the doorway. "Ma, can you give us a minute?" Margaret smiled and pulled the door closed behind her. Matthew used his good hand to reach into his pocket, fumbling slightly. "I had a whole speech planned for this, but getting shot sort of messed up my timing." "Matthew, what are you doing?" He produced a small ring, simple gold with a tiny chip of a diamond. "It was my grandmother's. Ma gave it to me before we left Hillsboro, said she had a feeling I might need it. Emma Jenkins, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? My actual, legal, properly married wife." Emma was crying again, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger with his good hand, then pulled her down for a kiss that was equal parts tender and triumphant. When they finally pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. "We should probably tell you that Marcus was arrested," Emma said. "I heard the police talking. He is being charged with attempted murder. He is going to prison for a very long time." "Good," Matthew said with satisfaction. "Maybe he will learn that you do not get to hurt people just because you are angry, though somehow I doubt it." "I do not care what happens to him anymore," Emma said honestly. "He does not get any more of my energy or my fear. I am done letting him control my life." They stayed in Dallas for another week while Matthew recovered enough to travel. During that time, Emma gave a statement to the police about the abuse she had suffered at Marcus's hands. Other women came forward too, women who had known Marcus socially and witnessed his temper. The case against him grew stronger by the day. Emma also hired a lawyer and filed for an annulment on the grounds that the marriage had never been legal in the first place. With the certified letter from the courthouse, it was a simple matter. She walked out of the lawyer's office feeling lighter than she had in years, truly free for the first time since she could remember. They returned to Hillsboro just before Christmas. The whole town turned out to welcome them home, having heard about their adventures through a series of telegrams. The story had grown somewhat in the telling, and Matthew was being hailed as a hero for protecting Emma and bringing a dangerous criminal to justice. "I just did what anyone would do," Matthew protested, embarrassed by all the attention. "No, you did what a good man does," Sheriff Bancroft corrected. "You stood up for someone who could not stand up for herself. That is the mark of real courage." Emma and Matthew were married on Christmas Eve in a ceremony at the small church in Hillsboro with the entire town in attendance. Emma wore a simple white dress that Margaret had made for her, and she carried wildflowers that had been preserved from Matthew's first gift to her all those months ago. As she walked down the aisle toward Matthew, who stood at the altar looking at her like she was the sun and the moon and all the stars combined, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was real. This was forever. This was the happy ending she had stopped believing in, given to her by a kind cowboy who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Emma felt Matthew take her hand. They exchanged vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew kissed her to thunderous applause from the assembled crowd. The reception was held at the boarding house, which Margaret had decorated with pine boughs and candles. There was food and music and dancing, and Emma laughed until her sides hurt. She danced with Matthew despite his still healing shoulder, swaying slowly to a fiddle tune while he whispered sweet promises in her ear. "I am going to build us a house," he said, "on the prettiest part of the ranch, with windows facing east so you can watch the sunrise every morning. We will have a big kitchen because I know you love to cook, and a library for all the books I am going to buy you." "That sounds perfect," Emma said, resting her head on his good shoulder. "Though I would be happy in a tent as long as I was with you." "No tents. You deserve the very best, and I am going to spend the rest of my life giving it to you." They moved into a room at the boarding house temporarily, while Matthew began work on their new home. Emma continued helping Margaret run the boarding house, and in the spring, she started taking in sewing work as well. She discovered she had a talent for it, and soon had more orders than she could fill. The house was completed by late summer of 1879. It was everything Matthew had promised and more, a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch and big windows that let in floods of light. Emma cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by the tangible proof of Matthew's love. They moved in on a warm September day, nearly a year after Emma had first arrived in Hillsboro. As Matthew carried her over the threshold, Emma looked around at the home they would build together and felt her heart swell with gratitude and love. That night, as they lay together in their new bed, Matthew pulled Emma close and kissed the top of her head. Happier than I ever thought possible," Emma admitted. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that you are real, I am real, this is real, and it is forever." Matthew tilted her face up to kiss her properly. "I love you, Emma Harris. I love you too." The following spring brought news that Marcus had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder and assault. Emma received the letter informing her of the verdict and burned it in the fireplace without a second thought. That chapter of her life was closed. She refused to let it take up any more space in her mind or her heart. Instead, she focused on her future. She and Matthew settled into married life with ease, their love deepening with each passing day. They worked side by side on the ranch, Emma proving to have a knack for animal husbandry that surprised them both. She started raising chickens and selling eggs, then expanded into keeping bees for honey. In the winter of 1880, Emma discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror. Matthew was over the moon, already making plans for a nursery and talking about teaching their child to ride. But Emma could not shake the fear that something would go wrong, that happiness this complete could not possibly last. "You are going to be an amazing mother," Matthew told her one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "I see the way you care for everything and everyone around you. Our child is going to be so loved." "I am scared," Emma admitted. "I am terrified that I will not know how to do this, that I will fail somehow. Then we will figure it out together, just like we figure out everything else." "You are not alone in this, Emma. You are never going to be alone again." Their son was born in early September of 1880, a healthy baby boy with Matthew's blue eyes and Emma's dark hair. They named him James after Matthew's father, and he became the center of their universe. Emma discovered that motherhood came more naturally to her than she had feared. She loved everything about it, from the weight of James in her arms to the sweet smell of his head to the way he smiled when he saw her face. Matthew was a devoted father, spending hours playing with James and changing diapers without complaint. Margaret was a doting grandmother, constantly coming over with little gifts and offering to watch James so Emma and Matthew could have time alone. The boarding house continued to thrive, and the extended family of residents and friends that surrounded them made Emma realize what she had been missing all those years. A community, people who cared about her not because they had to, but because they chose to. In the summer of 1882, Emma gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose after Emma's mother. Rose had Emma's green eyes and a temperament as sweet as her name suggested. James adored his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her and make her laugh. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch prospered under Matthew's careful management. Emma's sewing business grew to the point where she had to hire 2 other women to help her keep up with orders. They added on to the house, building more bedrooms for their growing family and a workshop for Emma's sewing. In 1885, their third child arrived, another boy they named Thomas. And in 1888, their fourth and final child was born, a girl they named Margaret after Matthew's mother, who had passed peacefully in her sleep the previous winter. Emma mourned Margaret deeply. The older woman had been the mother she had lost so young, a source of wisdom and unconditional love. But she found comfort in holding baby Margaret, in seeing her mother-in-law's kindness reflected in her daughter's eyes. The children grew up surrounded by love and laughter. James was serious and responsible, already showing signs of taking after his father. Rose was gentle and artistic, always drawing or making up songs. Thomas was adventurous and mischievous, keeping them all on their toes. And little Margaret, the baby, was affectionate and bright, with a smile that could light up a room. Emma and Matthew's love never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared joys and challenges. They had built something real and lasting, a family and a life that was everything Emma had dreamed of during those dark days when she thought she would never escape. On a warm evening in the summer of 1895, Emma and Matthew sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Their children were inside, the older ones helping the younger ones get ready for bed. From the house came the sounds of laughter and playful arguing, the normal chaos of a large, loving family. "You remember the day we met?" Matthew asked, reaching over to take Emma's hand. "How could I forget? I collapsed in the middle of the street like a fool." Emma smiled at the memory, so distant now it almost felt like it had happened to someone else. "You were the bravest person I had ever seen. Still are." Matthew brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I knew from the moment I saw you that you were going to change my life. Best decision I ever made, carrying you back to the boarding house that day. Best decision I ever made was trusting you." Emma squeezed his hand, looking at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. His hair was starting to gray at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting at the Texas sun. But to her, he was just as handsome as the day they had met. "I love you, Emma Harris. More today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow." "I love you too, Matthew. Thank you for giving me a life worth living, for giving me a family, for giving me everything." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into night. The stars began to emerge one by one, scattered across the darkening sky like diamonds. From inside the house, one of the children called out for a good-night kiss, and Emma rose to go tend to them. "Coming?" she asked Matthew. "Right behind you," he said, standing and stretching. "Would not miss it for the world." They walked into the house together, hand in hand, ready for whatever the future might bring. Behind them, the violent past Emma had fled was nothing more than a distant memory, powerless to touch the beautiful life they had built. She was safe. She was loved. She was home. And that, Emma thought as she kissed her children goodnight and climbed into bed beside the man she loved, was the greatest triumph of all. She had survived the darkness and found the light. She had run from violence and found peace. She had been lost and alone, and now she was found, surrounded by people who loved her. The cowboy who had become her protector had become so much more. He was her husband, her partner, her best friend, the father of her children. He was her home and her heart, and she was his. Together they had built something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of love and strength and hope. As Emma drifted off to sleep that night, Matthew's arm wrapped securely around her waist, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances. For new beginnings. For the kind of love that heals all wounds and makes all things possible. She had thought she would spend her life running, hiding, afraid. Instead, she had found a place to stand and fight for her happiness. She had found a man worth trusting with her bruised and battered heart. And in the end, love had won. It always did in the stories that mattered most. And this, Emma knew, was a story that would be told for generations. The story of a woman who ran from violence and found sanctuary. The story of a cowboy who saw someone in need and chose to help. The story of two hearts that found each other against impossible odds and built a love that nothing could destroy. It was their story. And it had the only ending that mattered, happily ever after. The years continued to roll by like the Texas plains in summer, each season bringing its own gifts and challenges. James grew into a fine young man and took over more of the ranch work, allowing Matthew to slow down a bit as age began to catch up with him. Rose married a kind schoolteacher and moved into town, but she visited often with her own growing family. Thomas headed west to seek his fortune in California, sending letters full of adventure that the whole family gathered to read. And little Margaret, not so little anymore, showed her grandmother's talent for business and began running the old boarding house that had started it all. Emma's hair turned silver, and Matthew's hands grew gnarled with arthritis, but their love remained constant. They spent their later years surrounded by grandchildren, passing down stories of how they met and fell in love. The grandchildren never tired of hearing about the day their grandmother collapsed in the street, and their grandfather carried her to safety, or about the trip to Dallas that nearly cost Matthew his life, or about the Christmas Eve wedding that the whole town attended. On a peaceful morning in the spring of 1910, Emma and Matthew celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary with a quiet breakfast on the porch they had shared for so many years. Their children and grandchildren would be arriving later for a party, but for now it was just the two of them, as it had been in the beginning. 32 years, Emma marveled, looking at the ring that had never left her finger since the day Matthew put it there. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. We have always been together, Matthew said with the wisdom of age. From the moment the world began, we were meant to find each other. It just took us a while to get there. Emma leaned over and kissed him, this man who had given her everything, who had seen her at her absolute worst and loved her anyway, who had fought for her and protected her and built her a life beyond her wildest dreams. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "For what?" "For seeing me. For saving me, for loving me." "Always," Matthew promised, as he had promised so many times before. "Always and forever, Emma, that is never going to change." And it never did. When Matthew passed peacefully in his sleep 5 years later, Emma grieved deeply but without regret. They had been given more years together than many people got, and they had made every single one of them count. She lived another 10 years after that, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the matriarch of a family built on love and respect and unwavering devotion. When Emma finally closed her eyes for the last time in the summer of 1925, she did so with a smile on her face, thinking of Matthew and the life they had built together. She had come to Hillsboro all those years ago broken and afraid, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the desperate hope that she might find safety. She had found so much more than that. She had found home. She had found family. She had found love in its purest and most powerful form. And in finding those things, she had found herself. The story of Emma and Matthew Harris became legend in Hillsboro. For generations, people told it to their children and grandchildren as an example of what real love looked like. Not the easy, fairy tale kind, but the kind that was tested by fire and emerged stronger. The kind that was willing to fight for what mattered. The kind that built legacies that lasted long after the original lovers were gone. And in the house that Matthew built, where generations of their descendants would live and love and raise families of their own, there was a picture that hung in the place of honor above the fireplace. It showed a young couple on their wedding day, standing in front of a small church with the whole town gathered around them. The man was tall and handsome with kind eyes, and the woman was beautiful in a simple white dress, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. They were looking at each other with such obvious love and devotion that it made everyone who saw the picture smile. And underneath, in Emma's careful handwriting, were the words that summed up their entire story. He was my protector. He became my everything. This is what it looks like when love wins.